to you guys a little bit about being a follower and or being a disciple. The title of this sermon is Follower or Disciple. And for those of you that want to go ahead and get your verses, your book marked in the Bible where we're going to talk about, the focus verses today are going to be Luke 14, 25 through 30. We're going to get that in just a minute. As I said, I apologize if my voice is not as strong as usual. I'll do my best to get through it and drinking a whole lot of water. So, what I would ask is, how important is your life to you? How important are the things in this world to you as a person? Do you love your family? Do you love your friends? Do you love yourself? This is important to think about because as a human, it's our nature to love those around us and to love ourselves. And how many times have you maybe made personal sacrifices for your family or your friends? I know I've done that on many occasions where I've done something that was not as good for me, but it was worth it because I was able to help grow my family, grow my friends, someone in a way that they would not have had without me being able to make that sacrifice. So, the reason I ask this is that we all know about the 12 disciples who started following Jesus, and they kind of left their life behind. It wasn't an easy thing. Whenever you were called to be, Jesus called them as a disciple, it wasn't something where they could go and just go off a certain direction. And they had to go straight in and start serving Christ. And give you an example of some of the things that happened. Whenever Jesus called Simon Peter, in Luke 5, 10, and 11 it says, "Don't be afraid," Jesus told Simon. "From now on you will be catching people." Then he brought the boats to land and left everything and followed him. So Simon Peter and his family, they were fishers. They went out and they put their nets down, they got their fish, and they took them in, and that was how they made things work. Yet, whenever Jesus stood up to him and said, "You're going to follow me," he left all that behind. He put it down, he put his nets down, he gave up. Odds are he even suffered something probably his family may have thought a little bit ill of him because that was their livelihood, and he was going to take over the fishing business. And all of a sudden he just left and just walked away because this guy named Jesus kind of stepped up and told him to. In the case of Matthew, the tax collector, it says in Luke 5, 27 through 28 that after this, Jesus saw a tax collector named Levi, he later named him to Matthew, sitting in the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So leaving everything behind, he got up and began to follow him. Now, for anyone who doesn't know about that particular era, the tax collector was kind of like the scum on the bottom of your sandal. The tax collector were the people who they were in charge by the Roman Empire to collect money, and there was no guidelines on how much you would take from people as long as you got enough to pay for that particular city's number of people. You could charge however much you wanted. And so a lot of these tax collectors would get really rich from taking this extra money. And whenever people started finding out about this, it was very nasty business, but people couldn't fight it because it's a machine that had been going all this time. So you can see there, we kind of have a trend, though, in following these disciples. Despite what was going on in their lives, they gave up what they had. They had something going on in the future where they could have kept doing what they were doing and made a very good profit, but they chose to drop everything and follow Jesus. So all of these men left everything they had to follow him, and they're later to be called disciples. So what I want to ask you guys today is, do you consider yourself a follower or a disciple? Because from the perspective of the Bible, that's very different things. Those are two very different things, a follower and a disciple. It's kind of our nature to assume that they're the same thing. But the reality is they're very different. In fact, you can see as we read through the scripture that Jesus made a major distinction between the people who followed him versus the people who were actually called to be his disciples. Many people followed Jesus around, especially as his ministry caught up and caught speed. Lots of people would follow Jesus around. The Gospels tell us that multitudes followed him at one point. Mark 3, 7, 8 says that Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude followed from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and around Tyre and Sidon. The great multitude came to him because they heard about everything he was doing. So these people, they wanted to follow Jesus. And it wasn't because Jesus was someone they admired, it was because this guy does miracles. He does these things that no one else is able to do. And these people would follow him around and got to the point where they were like, what is Jesus going to say next? Because it seemed like every time he talked, he would say something that really just kind of caught people off guard, or maybe really made them think about things. So he had people that would follow him everywhere he went. And it got to the point where Jesus eventually had to sort of be more of a private personality. He couldn't walk the streets without having huge amounts of people just gathering around him. And we think about it in the modern day with if we had a movie star that we knew of that came to visit us in Oklahoma, especially if they're a movie star that a lot of us like. Odds are, once people got wind of that person being here, they'd have a lot of people kind of following around trying to catch a glimpse of him. And Jesus was kind of a movie star in that way, that people wanted to see what he was going to do, and they knew he was important, and they wanted to follow him. But they were just following him to see him. They weren't following him for any other reason. And you notice that in Mark, in this particular term, where he's talking about the multitude, he makes a distinction about the multitude followed Jesus. Because the disciples are the ones that Jesus let on the boat with him, and they just wanted to be with him. The followers, on the other hand, just wanted to see Jesus because they knew he could do miracles, and that he could heal, and he could do these other things. They didn't care about what he was saying. They didn't care that he could teach. They were more interested in him, seeing him do a miracle, and seeing him do something that would just sort of surprise them and get them kind of going on. And later on, as Jesus was addressing his followers, he actually rebuked them. He spoke to them in a very negative way because he wanted to make sure that they understood the difference between following and actually being with him. He says that in Luke 9:57-60, that as they were traveling on the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." But Jesus told him, "Foxes have dens, and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Then he said to another, Follow me. Lord," he said, "first let me go bury my father." But he told him, "Let the dead bury their dead, but you go and spread the news of the kingdom of God." Jesus assigned a specific demand on this person who was going to be a follower. He wanted him to make the difference between following and actually discipling with Jesus. He said, "Leave everything you have. I don't care if you have a family that's passed away. I don't care if you have a lot of things that you wish you could take with you. No, you need to stop right now. You need to be willing to get up and go with me where I go." And this happened a lot of the time. And these people, they couldn't do it. They couldn't accept that they would have to give up everything that instant to follow Jesus. And the disciples that they actually did, that was different because they understood what was happening. They understood that that was necessary. But I don't think that in the modern day world, we want to think too much about having to give up our things to follow. It's a difference for us to think that all we have to do is just step out from our life for a minute, come to church on our Sunday, come to church on our Wednesday, and we're okay. We don't want to give up our life some of the times. But then you clearly see that God expects us to be willing to give up what we have to go wherever he leads us. Certainly it's easy for me to talk about that because in being my call to the ministry, I had to take a very different aspect of my life. I had to completely change the way I viewed things, the way I expected my future, the way I planned things, because God had called me to do it. He called me to serve, and so I knew that I was going to have to make some changes. I knew I was going to have to make those sacrifices. And it was kind of scary, but the fact is, I knew that God was going to lead me there, and I wanted to go ahead and follow him. But it's not something that I did easily, and I don't think any of us here can say that they find it easy to give up what they have to give up sometimes so that they can do the right thing from Christ's perspective. And as we talked about being a disciple, we're actually going to focus now on those verses. So what's the difference between being a follower and being a disciple? This is what I want to drive home. In Luke 14:25-30, we read this. "Now great crowds were traveling with him." And there's those crowds again. We talked a lot about them before. They're back. "So he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and his own mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if you've laid the foundation and cannot finish it? Otherwise he has laid the foundation and cannot finish it, and the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build something he wasn't able to finish.'" That's a pretty strong designation from Jesus there, and we have to look at some very interesting things that kind of help us establish the difference here. First of all, we need to understand that a disciple comes from the word discipline. Disciple doesn't come from the word follower. It comes from the root word of discipline. And not in the sense of what we do to our kids to make them be right, but discipline in the sense of being able to do what you have to do. One of the hardest things about people who do weight loss programs and things is they don't have the discipline to keep themselves going on a plan forever. And we sometimes, want to do a high-level degree, and we may not have the discipline to keep ourselves focused on the task and still kind of get everything else in life going. And